Well, hello there, and thank you for joining me for the latest edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cooke, and we have a packed show for you this week. We're going to visit with Veronica Merryfield, the head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network, to talk about Cape Breton activities centering around Trans Day of Visibility. You're also going to get an update on the fate of the Port Royal Bridge in Western Isle-Madame, and we'll take a deep dive on how some Richmond Municipal Councillors and the Warden are working together to provide funding to community groups around the county. But we begin with a look at housing in Richmond County and how the rising Richmond County population is affecting housing in the area. Yes, that's right, the rising population of Richmond County. After several years of decline, there has been a little bit of growth, specifically 0.6% between 2021 and 2022. Now, that might not seem like much, but according to Warden Amanda Mombourquette, that is enough to put the county in a housing pinch that may get even worse as time goes on. So, there are some new figures that have come out, courtesy of a recent meeting of Richmond Municipal Council and members of the Nova Scotia Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. That took place just a couple of weeks ago, and Warden Mombourquette gave an update on this meeting and on the figures coming out of it at the March 25th regular meeting of Council at the Richmond Municipal Building. Here's what Warden Mombourquette had to say, and it's going to be interspersed with some comments that the Warden made to me as I interviewed her for this edition of Telile 24/7 after the Council meeting.
I just want to move us on to just a general housing update, and this is related to the meeting that we were able to attend last week with members from Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. I think they were pretty much all from that department. So obviously more on the housing side than the municipal affairs side. And I think Shelley has a little slide, that kind of slideshow. It's just something I put together following the meeting that captures some of the key components that they were talking about, but then really looks at, the last slide is really about action planning. How do we tackle this in our communities? So some of the key points, obviously, what we heard from the folks at Municipal Affairs and Housing, according to our housing needs assessment, and is that we've had a slight population increase. We've had a slight increase in households, 4% increase from 2016 to 2021. Our vacancy rate had been mainly steady, but went from 7% to 6.2% in 2021. Again, this data, now here we are in 2024, I anticipate we would be accurate in saying it's becoming more and more of a crunch. So we know which way things are trending. Our permits were trending in 2022 lower than historical levels, but they picked up dramatically, is what we heard from the Eastern District Planning Commission for 2023, and it projected to do the same this year as well, once the March numbers are in. There's no question the pandemic drove people to rural Nova Scotia. We're a safe place to live from a crime standpoint, from a health standpoint. Certainly during the pandemic, it was a lot easier for people to be able to have space around them in rural communities, and it attracted a lot of people back here. And we saw the downside of that as being property values going up, and of course the availability of housing as well. So we welcome these newcomers, and a lot of cases it's people who were from here originally who are returning home. I know many families with young kids who have done that. So we're so happy to have them back, and that's exactly what we want to be doing, is growing Richmond County. But we do have to manage the problems of growth as much as we have to manage the problems of decline. So this is this has created a bit of a housing crunch for not just Richmond County but all over the province of Nova Scotia. And I think also the secret's out. Richmond County is poised for some pretty dramatic growth in the coming years, and I think the next set of census statistics will show that people have a really strong interest in living and working here as well. So some additional steps that I think council needs to be taking, and in partnership with our friends at the provincial and federal government as well. In terms of measuring folks in Richmond who are in core housing need, the statistics here speak for themselves. themselves. This, again, is based on census data, so nothing kind of more common or more up-to-date, than what we have as data for 2021. But we did see, some dramatic shifts, from owners and renters of minus 44% and minus 32%. So these are folks who do not have alternatives. They're faced with unaffordability, suitability, and inadequacy, so housing in bad conditions, et cetera. So it's a dire situation for our county, just like many other regions of the province. I do think that's always, that's been the case for a very long time in our communities. We don't really have an availability of shelters here. We don't really have, I think we've got fantastic service in Leaside, but at the end of the day, not a lot of options, and they have very limited capacity, and of course are very focused on women. And so we do have some major gaps from that regard, from, kind of second stage housing, as well as, even market housing. There's a lot of room for growth in our housing industry, and we need to kind of start taking some more proactive steps. So the bottom line with the housing needs assessment is that there is an existing shortfall that they are projecting we have now of 370 units. They're projecting by 2027 that shortfall will grow to 515 units. Historically, an average of 50 units are built each year within our county. But if at that rate, that build rate would leave us with a shortfall of still 265 units by 2027 based on their projections. So we would need an additional 55 units to close that gap per year. So it's a monumental task. What they've outlined would need to be done in order to eliminate the shortfall completely. Thank you, Shelley. So they did discuss in the presentation about the provincial 5-year housing targets, specifically helping to create over 41,000 new homes in Nova Scotia, supporting over 17,000 more affordable units, and improving housing conditions for more than 47,000 households. But, I guess my question back to council, my question to them was, what could this mean for Richmond County? And, maybe we should be looking at setting our own regional goals so that we know what how close we are to what success would look like in Richmond County, at the end of 2027. And I think, that's an exercise we could undertake ourselves or through a potential partnership with the town of Port Hawkesbury, through the Straight Richmond Housing Coalition, the Straight Area Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. Council has been taking steps, but what I was proposing this evening to the other councillors was really looking at more of a collective impact. So not just what are we doing, but what are we doing and what can we be doing in partnership with groups like the Straight Area Chamber of Commerce, the provincial government, private developers, the new housing, Nova Scotia Housing Agency, the new Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. How can we put all of those partners together and create a strategy for Richmond County, for the Straight Richmond area, that will help us move the needle even more quickly, because we can't do it alone. The action plan that I think we, was ruminating on all the stats after the meeting. I think we do need to, take some more aggressive action planning at a very local level here, and really centered around capacity building. We've had developers approach us, for various projects. How do we capitalize on that? How do we respond to affordable housing programs? How do we support affordability in our communities? How do we develop and refine the tools that the province is providing us with, but also what can we do to add to them? Things like land inventories, that type of thing, which I know we've discussed in the past. Are there, ways that we can provide capital programs or access to capital programs? And I know we're developing policy in that regard now, so, we're moving in the right direction. And how do we navigate solutions? So some of the actions around, for something like capacity building, really, I think, does need to start with the establishment of the Nonprofit Housing Association that the Straight Area Chamber has been taking a lead on. The conversations have been ongoing, but it's not a small thing to lift a brand new organization. We're trying to figure out things like governance structures and, what that will look like, how do we attract people, what are the types of skills we need around the table for a board of directors for such an entity. So we're still in the planning stages of that, but as recently as today, we were communicating with them about it, and they're moving forward with, with hopefully creating some final planning on, at least structure within the month of April at least. So, it's moving along, but it is a big lift. But I think also some work that we could be doing in the background, analyzing and comparing data, which is something that we I've had on our action items list for a little while now. On the supporting affordability, this is maybe, getting our housing support workers in, working a little bit more closely with them. How do we, support the more distribution of rent supplements in this region? When it comes to developing and refining tools, some examples would be, like I said, the available lands. What kind of policies can we put in place? I was discussing with Troy earlier today, maybe there's an opportunity for us to create a digital kind of repository of housing information on our website, similar to how we have seniors information on our website and, areas of our website that are dedicated for special initiatives where we feel that there's a pressing need. So we could start to collect data there to help people who want to develop potential projects, to really kind of give us a central repository where we're collecting that information. And in terms of providing, capital programs, of course it's about infrastructure investment, and I think there's a role obviously for us there. There's a role for the provincial government and potentially the federal government in that regard as well. And then action planning around navigating solutions. It's developer engagement. It's the work that we do now as councillors, as you as a CAO, Troy, working with developers. But very specifically, what we've pitched back, I think, informally during that meeting, and I will plan to follow up with DMAH on as well, is creating a housing navigation service, a housing navigator. So similar to how we have, across the province, you'll find municipalities investing in a senior safety coordinator and leveraging provincial funding to make that position sustainable year after year, active living coordinator, et cetera. There are many examples where the provincial government puts that kind of program in place. And given that I would say housing is probably the second, if not the top issue facing this province right now, it's something that I think we should continue to pitch to them as an opportunity for us to invest with them to create a navigation service that would help us be prepared for investment, because I think that is a big challenge, and I know that some of our developers have certainly felt that as well.
When you look at those numbers, those are very concerning numbers, and I think for me, when we look at the course of government, how it works, I mean, some people will say that we're the last line of defense when it comes to the federal government, provincial government, municipal government, but my take on that situation could also work that we're also the first line of offense, and it's for me, I think it's time we get offensive here and turn the offense up and really get this moving. And as you mentioned, the work on our bylaw and policy when it comes to capital development, I think that's a step in the right direction. But I think that we got to get moving, and we got to help out some potential developers here and move this needle forward for sure.
And from my perspective, it begins with this conversation, getting things together related to a nonprofit housing entity in the region. I will say, though, I feel really strongly that we could also be pitching to our provincial partners to look at leveraging some provincial and municipal funding together to create housing coordinators, much like we have senior safety coordinators and much like we have other types of positions in counties all across the province of Nova Scotia, where the municipality provides the seed funding basically and is able to leverage that to a provincial program. So I'm looking forward to talking more with our MLA and other interested parties about about that kind of an opportunity. I can't make any guarantees, but certainly based on the conversations we've had around the table with our council, I don't think it would be a difficult sell for us to be putting some investment in, because just navigating the processes. To be able to attach our private sector developers and even people who are interested in doing affordable housing developments, to be able to help them navigate those processes at both like the federal and provincial levels to access funding, that's a piece of work. It's not for the faint of heart, and so I think we could be doing a better job of smoothing the way and helping to provide a certain level of service on the ground.
Since Nova Scotia Public Works crews started sending heavy machinery to the site of the Port Royal Bridge in Western Isle Madame earlier this year, residents of the nearby communities have been concerned about the bridge's future. Public Works officials have confirmed that a tender has been awarded to have the bridge completely removed later this spring. And work has already begun at that site. Public Works officials have also confirmed that the department plans to put some work into McEachern Road, which has been serving as a detour route for residents in the affected communities since the bridge shut down in 2017. Richmond Municipal Council was asked earlier this year to send a letter supporting the bridge to Kim Masland, who is Nova Scotia's Minister of Public Works. A reply recently came to that letter, and it was shared at Monday evening's Municipal Council meeting in Arichat. How did Warden Amanda Mombourquette and the councillor representing the area, District 2's Michael Digdon, feel about the response from Minister Masland, who confirmed that the work is going to go ahead as scheduled and the bridge will be removed? Here is how Councillor Digdon and Warden Mombourquette responded.
They have sent correspondence back through to us from the letter that we originally sent, definitely committing to making concrete improvements to McEachern Road to improve, basically the safety of it, but also I think, the potential for coast, the impact of coastline erosion and sea level rise. So they do have some very firm plans, and they've reassured us of that, which is really great news.
The bridge was sitting there for 7 years. Not being used, I guess. So the saying "too little, too late" is probably fitting for this for the bridge. It's I know it's heartbreaking for the community. It was heartbreaking for myself. However, like myself and all the residents of Germans Island and Richmond County that travel that road, or have traveled that road, the McEachern Road has been used the last 7 years. I mean, all we can do is The province said they were going to step up and do some upgrades to the road, and I believe they will do it. So we have to give them the opportunity to make those upgrades, and I guess go forward from there.
I do understand that the people in that region are, many folks are disappointed in losing the Port Royal Bridge. In the scheme of things, the province of Nova Scotia is facing an infrastructure deficit that is much, much greater than even we face here in this municipality. And so I can't say I don't understand their decision making behind it, because I really do. It's not maybe the desired outcome for our county, but at the end of the day, if we do have strong improvements to McEachern Road, then I think residents will still be well served by the transportation infrastructure in that area. So
the catch-22 is that the bridge was shut down 7 years ago for a reason, and then not reopened, obviously because of safety issues. And then when the residents made a concern that McEachern Road was unsafe, well then the province has to step up, or the province stepped up and said, okay, well then our priority is to make McEachern Road safe. So if you feel the road you're traveling is unsafe, so I guess in absence of replacing the bridge, if the residents felt the road was unsafe, well then they're going to fix the road first regardless. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we're at now, is the road becomes precedent and priority, and we have to give the province the ability or the time to do the upgrades and repairs, and hopefully it'll be according to spec and satisfaction to all the community.
It is always hard to lose a piece of infrastructure, especially something like the bridge where it's connected communities. But at the end of the day, the detour is about 2 minutes. If you're not familiar with the road like I am, I was out driving it, and we have some communities who were facing. I mean, as you'll recall, the Cape George, the bridge in Cape George last year, that was something like a 45 minute detour around, and we've got some pretty extreme situations happening in other areas, not just of the county, but all across the province. So I think we need to be a little bit understanding of that, although, like I said, I understand it's a tough piece of infrastructure to lose.
I asked Councillor Michael Digdon if he was satisfied by the response from Public Works Minister Kim Masland. Here's what he had to say.
I am. Honestly, I wasn't expecting anything different. Again, the bridge has been closed for 7 years. Like I say, it's a hard pill to swallow, but at the same time, I believe in down the road we'll see the province or the local area manager or the council maybe looking at putting a walking beams or walking trail across there for accessibility for those who want to walk, to continue to make the loop. I think that's something that we can look at doing in the near or not so near future, but in the next couple of years. And I think if nothing else, that'll make encompass a great closure to the to being able to travel from one side to the other. It's I looked at it last week. They did a great job. It's actually not a bad spot to set up a nice little picnic table and for people coming into the area and just sit and watch the water flow through the inlet and outlet.
Midway through March, at the Committee of the Whole meeting held by Richmond Municipal Council in Arichat, District 1 Councillor and Deputy Warden Sean Sampson brought forth a request from a member of Royal Canadian Legion Branch 150 Almaden. That request involved a project called Operation Veterans Build. Here is Deputy Warden Sampson explaining how the project works, how the request came to him, and in a few moments' time you'll also hear him addressing the details of the project during Richmond's Committee of the Whole meeting, as well as commentary that came after the March 25th regular meeting of Richmond Municipal Council.
I was approached by Clive Sampson, who is a volunteer at the Legion and a veteran, and Clive's doing a lot of great work in our area, in our community. This is a program that started last year at the local Legion here, the Branch 150 Legion. So it's a program that started where veterans work alongside other veterans, and it helps them rekindle their experience and talk about their experience in the service and to get support from like-minded individuals that have things in common. It's a day where some local veterans get together and build some picnic tables. They're built with 2x6s, and it's a day where the veterans get together and share memories and share a day and build some community picnic tables. So as we all know, one of the key focuses when it comes to a Legion is to help with the transition to post-service military life, right? So this program here helps in that situation. Their goal is to help the community out when it comes to placing some of these picnic tables in tourism areas and areas where people would sit down and have a meal and just and when he spoke to me about it, of course the first option he had was the Babbins Hill Lookoff. I was hoping that we could look at some of our spots in our area and help support this program, right, and help support these veterans. There's also places like outdoor festivals during the summertime. I think of the Yacht Club Festival, the Wharf in the Scoos. I think of the Shark Derby in Peterborough. Those would be all great areas to put some of these picnic tables, right? So hopefully council and staff can come together and support this program. The funding, the profit and the funding goes to the Poppy Fund for the Arichat Legion, right? You also look at, community halls. I look at baseball fields in our area, So for me, I would like to see if we can look at funding. Maybe this is a budget discussion, but I would like to see us support this group and help put some picnic tables in and around our area if we can.
Well, I think what we could do is probably ask staff to consider it at this point. I don't know how much of a commitment we could make at this stage of the game. Need to see what would be maybe a right fit, and I think also understanding a little bit of the design of what those picnic tables would be, because there'd be accessibility and other types of concerns about it. Just that would need to make sure are checked off, right? So yeah, could I have a motion to refer this to staff for investigation?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Councillor Digdon, thank you. Could I have a seconder, please?
Yep, I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. And thanks for bringing that to our attention. It sounds like a great program. Any other discussion on that motion? Okay, so all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is carried.
I think it's a great program. I think it's a win-win for everybody, Adam. Yeah.
And now we're going to visit with the founder and head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network and the education consultant for Cape Breton Pride. This is a busy time of year for Veronica Merryfield as she gears up for Trans Day of Visibility activities here in Cape Breton, but she's also getting ready to head to Halifax to speak to provincial government officials about gender-affirming care. Here on location in Sydney is my conversation with Veronica Merryfield.
So Transgender Day of Visibility happens to highlight those of us who are in the community that don't normally have that visibility. So it's been around for a number of years. It's always on March the 31st. It's always a place that we can both celebrate who we are, but also to highlight the issues that many of us face.
So what kind of Trans Day of Visibility activities are you involved in this year? I understand there's a bit of a shift in the scheduling this time around.
We're flag raising on Thursday at 9:30 at the CBRM outside the Municipal Building, because this year the Transgender Day of Visibility falls across Easter weekend. And it's not lost on me that Easter is about rebirth, which is often the case for many who transition and find themselves.
Veronica, what can you tell me about the history of Trans Day of Visibility and how far we've come from those early days? And also what kind of energy you're seeing at the current Trans Day of Visibility event?
So Transgender Day of Visibility first started in 2009 as a response to the invisibility that a lot of us have, and the backlash that we often find ourselves facing. In the last few years, the flag raising events have been relatively well attended, and the energy is good. But given the protests that happened last year, it's becoming more important that visibility for those of us who are willing to be visible is counted. And I know from some of the responses I've got so far that this year's event should be a bit more well attended than it has been in the past. The energy is always good at these events, and I'm always pleased to see the turnout. And I'm always pleased to see how many councillors turn out for it, which is a big piece of this. It's a big piece of that being visible. And that visibility helps others know that we're around.
Veronica, with this in mind, I'm curious as to who you feel really bears the responsibility for protecting and promoting the trans community and those within it. We obviously have some prominent trans Nova Scotians, among them Lisa Lachance, the first ever trans MLA serving on an NDP riding in Halifax. There's also, of course, the actor Elliot Page, who recently presented the Juno Humanitarian Award to Canadian musicians Tegan and Sarah at the award ceremony in Halifax. So is it up to the trans community itself to protect itself and demand its rights? Is it up to cis allies to fight for them? Or do you feel it's a combination of the two that should be speaking up right about now?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Adam. The responsibility for visibility for everybody is everybody's responsibility. And it doesn't matter whether we were celebrating the trans community or we were celebrating other parts of the community. There's an allyship that needs to happen across the community for the community. So I'm well aware that whilst we have the Transgender Day of Visibility, there are other people who need that visibility too. There's a lot of invisible people around, and that invisibility means that a lot of people in the community don't always understand some of those issues that we face. So this is part of the highlighting of this particular part or section of the community is, the pieces of visibility that we do need because of their influence on various public policies.
Veronica Merryfield, as we speak here in one of the most public parts of Sydney, Wentworth Park, it strikes me that there was a time in your life when you might not have felt safe doing a very visible television interview in a very public place like this. Can you talk a little bit about that to share your perspective on your past?
And again, that's very true. I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing that even 10 years ago. I'm not necessarily sure that I'm always that comfortable being in public. One of the things that does happen for me is that kind of hypervigilance. But I do feel safer being able to do this in a public place today. And I'm hoping that stays the way over the next decade, 2 decades, and that others would feel safe to be able to do that in a way that I know they wouldn't have been able to feel safe doing that in years past.
Does your own determination to make the world a safer place for trans people, especially trans youth, drive you to take on challenges that might have frightened you even a decade ago?
So that again is a good question. What is my drive? And my drive has really been to help those in the community who haven't come out not take their own lives. The suicide rates for the trans community is still quite high, often uncounted, because people don't necessarily know that they were transgender before they take their lives. So anything I can do to help stop those numbers is a good thing. But it's a hard thing too, because I don't see those who don't take their lives, I only ever see those that do. And that makes it all the more difficult, but all the more determination to do this publicly, so that people do feel they have somebody that they can reach out to. And I know it's helped others come out into public life for this very similar reasons.
Veronica, we've talked about your early struggles in terms of recognizing who exactly you were. Can you tell us a little bit about how visibility of trans people in public forums and even just in the general community has changed since that time?
50 years ago, more or less as a young child, whilst I knew who I was, I didn't see any visibility or representation around me. I didn't know who to go out and talk to. I didn't have anybody else's story that I could look at. It wasn't until my teens that I discovered the musician Wendy Carlos, and her story was published in some of the music magazines that I was kind of perusing at that time, from my own interest in music and electronics. But it was still a while before I felt, I was going to say, comfortable enough to come out, but it wasn't a comfort as you might imagine. I had a stark choice. I could either be who I was, or I could take my life. And it was still difficult then. So that brings us up to about 30 years ago, where the visibility was a little bit better, and I did come across others. But even then it was hard for us to find each other. 30 years ago was the early days of the internet in terms of how public and broad it is now. And those of us who did connect actually connected on an old technology called IRC, Internet Relay Chat. And even that took me a while to find, and it took a lot of people to find because of that piece of public visibility and people being out in public. Post-transition, I obviously knew more people, I got to know more people, but it was still hard, and it was hard for children, particularly children and youth, to be able to find those who were visible, to show them that it would be okay and to find that help they needed. In the last 30 years, that has changed quite significantly, but the shoulders of those that I stand on did a lot of work in the publicity and education, which is why that kind of education is so key and why visibility is so key. It's getting easier in general and has done for the last couple of decades, but I think when you have that rising education, because it's not reaching everybody, there's still a lot of fear and pushback. And we're starting to see more of that now. And I don't always like to be political, but the personal is political. And the right-wing politics that we're seeing creeping up from the US in particular is starting to have an effect. The prospective Canadian politician for the next election has started talking about banning transgender women from certain spaces. And he's also taken to talking about biological sex without really understanding the implications of that. But it's interesting to me that he's picking on transgender women and not picking on transgender men, going to what we would call the transmisogyny that exists out there. And I'm not entirely sure where that comes from in that mindset. When I do talk to people about it, it's usually a misunderstanding. And I do like to talk to people one-on-one about that, because that piece of education is so key, and it's how the education spreads through the broader community.
You and I have talked before about the situation in New Brunswick, where changes to Policy 713 mean that students' identities are no longer protected by school officials. Similar activity taking place last fall with the government of Saskatchewan and more recently with the government of Alberta. Does it cause you concern knowing that, as you say, attitudes and actions against the trans community that we might have thought to be more common to the United States are now actually making their way up to Canada, and then in the case of the Maritimes, hitting really close to home.
Yes, and that again is a very good question. It is close to home. It's a fear for a lot of the community. The school-aged children that I do, and youth that I do meet at CSAs in schools are scared of what that might mean. Schools are meant to be a safe place, but to be honest, a family is meant to be a safe space. But if the child knows that their home life is not safe in the same way that my home life as a child wasn't safe in that respect, finding a safe space for them to be able to explore themselves, for them to be able to gain the confidence to know who they are before they have to talk to their parents is a really powerful piece. And taking that away means that those children and youth don't have anywhere safe and potentially can't talk to those of us who've been there, seen it, done it, got the t-shirt kind of thing, to understand what's involved, to understand how that piece of themselves is able to come out. And I think one of the things that probably disturbs me as much as that is people I talk to are in their 60s and 70s who have struggled their entire lives knowing who they are, but not felt safe in society to be able to come out despite that rising education. So there's two ends to this, which is why the visibility is so important, and it's why I took the step to stand up publicly. I've had a good life. I've been able to come out. It's not been without its adversity, but to be able to help others find themselves is such a great experience for me to watch those people find themselves and come out in relative safety. And that safety is something that a lot of us have spent a lot of years trying to create.
As we talk about safe spaces, Veronica Merryfield, it's worth pointing out that you're not only the founder and head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network, but you're also the education coordinator for Cape Breton Pride. With this in mind, could you tell me what you and your colleagues are doing to help educate the community, both inside and outside of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, about what it's like living as a trans person and how trans people can be protected?
So for me, education is one of those ongoing things. I educate in my daily life whoever I come across. I educate those that I work with that are colleagues. But I also educate when I'm invited to any events that I can. And interesting, last week we had an International Women's Day panel session where I was one of the speakers. And it wasn't news to me that a lot of the things that I go through, others go through too. During the International Women's Day panel, I spoke about how the binary is something that we often use, or is often used in society, to pitch two pieces of society against each other. So very commonly we might talk about men or women. But actually, for a lot of society, it's about what it's not. It's about men and not men. It's about being white or not white. It's about being cisgendered or not cisgendered. And those pieces allow people to see that there is that piece of intersectional discrimination that happens to a lot of us. So education for me is something that's an ongoing process. I get invited to speak to all sorts of different organisations, to work with them, or to provide training events. So it's not so much about what's currently going on, it's about it's always going on.
Now, one of the things that you have going on over the next couple of weeks is that you're making another visit to Halifax to speak to officials with the Department of Health and Wellness on gender-affirming care. This is not your first time making such a presentation. What points are you hoping to drive home to government officials this time around?
So I've been working with the Department of Health's policy team for some while on gender-affirming care. There were a number of changes that happened last year but there's still more changes that need to happen. So there's some very specific things that I'm interested in changing. So for instance, anyone that's going for gender affirming surgery in Montreal, for instance, has to put up the money to get there themselves to start with, and then are reimbursed later. That's a significant barrier for some folks who just can't raise that amount of cash, even over a longer term, because of that intersectionality that they face with discrimination over things like employment. So these are the kind of things that I want to see changed in any way that Nova Scotia Health deems appropriate, but certainly being able to provide that level of care should be improved. I've recently heard people talk about why the health service should be covering gender affirming care at all. And one of the arguments I use, if you're going to go down the financial angle in terms of a government perspective, is what is the cost to the government of not providing that care? So very often those who are transgender, who aren't or are prohibited from seeking that care that they deserve, end up costing the health service in terms of extended mental health care, extended medication. Often they find it difficult to work because of the mental health issues that it creates, and that means that it's a financial cost to the government. Enabling those folks to transition takes away a lot of the causality to that mental health issue that they have, and allows them to function as happy individuals in society and becoming a net contributor to the government coffers. So there's other things from the health perspective. There's still pieces around the gender affirming care that patients have to pay an overly substantial amount of money for as part of that process that aren't covered under healthcare, that I think should be reasonably covered under healthcare, as one might have found campaigning in history for various other pieces of healthcare. It's also a piece of healthcare that is not terribly well understood, even though it's a fairly significant percentage of folks looking for that kind of care.
So we've talked a bit about your work with the Nova Scotia government on gender affirming care, and you've also been to Ottawa to make the case for gender affirming care to the federal government. We've talked just a moment ago about what's happening in other provincial governments, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Alberta, in terms of trans rights. How do you feel Nova Scotia is doing in this regard?
In much the same way that Nova Scotia was the starting point of colonisation in Canada and Turtle Island, it's also been an interesting starting point for gender affirming care. Things have been progressing fairly well in Nova Scotia for some years. We're still not on a par with the Yukon, who moved their policies forward very quickly a few years ago to be a complete coverage. But then there's other provinces where things are a lot harder than they are in Nova Scotia. There's limited options still across Canada. So for instance, for surgeries, it's Montreal, Toronto or Vancouver, which means that some of the provinces put that onus on others, put that onus on the community to get to those places. It's okay if you live in Montreal or you live in Toronto or you live in Vancouver, but if you live outside of that, you've still got a lot of work to do. And provinces such as Saskatchewan and Alberta and New Brunswick are making that harder. And I'd like to see that those provinces will start to take the lead from Nova Scotia and the Yukon, which is another reason why I'm pushing, and I'm hoping that the lead that Nova Scotia has had in the past will continue to be had across Canada.
So as we wind down our conversation and you prepare for the CBRM Trans Day of Visibility activities going on March the 28th, this may seem like an obvious question, Veronica Merryfield, but What do you personally take away from all this, and what do you hope to achieve on March the 28th and beyond?
I guess it is an obvious question. It's a mixed bag of feelings. Compared to my life's journey, I'm really positive with the number of people that do turn out, with the support that there is generally in the community. But I also know that there's a lot of work still to be done. Some of that is challenging, but some of it is really rewarding too. And being able to have those one-on-one conversations with folks who are willing to approach is a really interesting piece. And I'm really happy to share my life story and why it's important that we do support the transgender community.
Well, Veronica, I always feel like we learn a lot whenever I get to speak to you for Telile Community Television, so thank you for giving me some time to talk about the Trans Day of Visibility coming up on March 31st, but the actual CBRM celebrations for Trans Day of Visibility coming up on Thursday, March 28th. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Adam, and it's been nice to film it in Wentworth Park.
Veronica Merryfield is the head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network and the education coordinator for Cape Breton Pride. Stay tuned for more of Telile 24/7 in just a moment. On Monday evening's regular meeting of Richmond Municipal Council, 3 financial measures were passed to assist community groups around the county. Now we're going to take a deep dive on how councillors and the warden worked together to be able to provide funding from their various district funds to assist not only the Isle Madame Garden Club and the Isle Madame New Horizons for Seniors Club, but also the Richmond County Literacy Network and its promotion of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which helps to get free books to young children around the coverage area of the Literacy Network. Here to set things up is Richmond Warden Amanda Mombourquette.
So the first item is a memo from our CFO, Jason Martel, regarding a request from the Richmond County Literacy Network for funding. So they're looking for $1,000 to support the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. This, of course, has come to the council table in the past, was a program that I know I had reached out to the new RCLN board about as soon as they were formed, and really excited to see it up and running, but just open for discussion from councillors if you feel that we should support the $1,000 request.
Yeah, I think we should support that $1,000 request, and I would put a motion forward that we would take it out of our regional fund.
It's a fantastic program, familiar with it, and I'd be willing to put the 500 from my district fund within that 1,000.
So the motion would be to support the Dolly Parton Imagination Library project with our CLN to the tune of $1,000, 500 from the regional fund and 500 from the district fund of Councillor Sampson.
Yeah, I'd be, I don't know, Councillor Sampson has more money than me. He penny pinched, but he did good. I don't think I have as much, but I'd be willing to put $250 from my district fund as well.
I'm just going to say you may want to check your emails in your package. The 500 is the remainder in District 5. I think you've got significantly more than that. Just to be clear, you have 3578 left in here.
Right.
I'm aware it was just a joke because usually you have more money than the rest of us.
Certainly is something I would be willing to contribute to as well. I would put the 250 in, or actually, I think I would put the 500, the other 500, unless Deputy Warden, you wanted to participate, but I know that there were some significant projects in your region as well, so, yeah. So we could support the motion. We can't do the 250 each, yeah. So if you were willing to put the 500 in from your district fund, I would do the same, and that will cover the $1,000. The motion was carried to do $1,000 for Richmond County Literacy Network, 500 of which would come from District 4, and 500 would come from District 5 district accounts there. Okay, the next item is the Isle Madame Garden Club, the funding request for the Type 1 infrastructure grant in the amount of $4,500. So the Garden Club has provided some, background information. We do have a memo from CFO Jason Martel outlining that this grant application is ready to be considered.
Well, I will say that I don't know if anybody's attended their meetings or their green thumb planting, I guess, but have a great system, and honestly, they'll teach you if you don't know how to plant anything, they'll teach you how to do it. They're a great little organization, and they're growing very fast. I first become councillor, I was thinking the garden club. What is even the garden club? Of course, my green thumb is as bad as they get, but you learn very quickly through people like Claire Doyle and George Keogh and all the rest of them. There's a crew. They have over 400 people on their Facebook page, and they do amazing work. If you don't know how to plant, they'll teach you. They do a trade-off of seeds, of flowers, of all kinds of stuff. They have a great little organization.
All right, thanks, Councillor Digdon. So it does represent about, I think it's a little less than 50% of the project. So typically when we've been entertaining these types of applications for larger projects, we've been looking for that threshold, not to exceed 50. That's kind of an unwritten practice that we've had. So it does align that way. I will mention that there is only about a little less than $6,000 left in that regional account. So how, if folks are interested in supporting this project, how we do that will have to be, carefully crafted, I guess, because we do have an additional request from the Almadam New Horizons Seniors Club for $5,000 as well to consider. So maybe over to you, Deputy Warden.
Yes, thank you, Madam Warden. The way I see it, I guess we just saved $1,000 in our regional fund last request. So, like Councillor Digdon, I'm going to support this project as well. My take on it is maybe we look at, and I can't speak for Councillor Digdon, but I'm willing to go $1,500 out of my District 1 fund, and hopefully $1,500 out of the regional fund. And that'll leave $1,500 out of someone else's fund, I guess. But so I'll support the $1,500 out of my District 1 and looking for maybe $1,500 out of the regional.
Shortly after Deputy Warden Sean Sampson committed $1,500 from his District 1 fund, District 2 Councillor Michael Digdon made the same commitment, leaving $1,500 to be contributed from the regional fund.
Okay. Could I have a seconder on that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sampson. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion is carried.
The new funding request was for a waterfalls or water flow garden, I guess. I'm not sure I guess a water flow garden, and it's the drawing was amazing. Again, it's one extra step. It's for people can kind of sit, relax, listen to the water flow, do the whole, it's surrounded by flowers. The picture was amazing, and I'm sure, knowing the people that's on the garden club, it will be an amazing project.
The next item on the agenda is the memo from the CFO regarding the Almadam New Horizons Seniors Club. This request is for $5,000, and it's to conduct repairs to the building, which I know we have used on occasion for municipal activities.
Last year, I think, or the year before, they put a metal roof. I think they put some accessibility patios and heat pumps and stuff like that. But I think this one here mentioned some siding, facelift for the front of the building, some new windows, doors, and some new siding. So I think that's where that money's going to go.
I guess I would, again, open the floor to discussion on this. Keeping in mind those financial constraints that I mentioned earlier. But maybe I'll leave it back over to the Districts 1 and 2 councillors to open the discussion on that.
I still have an amount in my District 1 fund, so I'd be willing to support this project as close to the $5,000 as possible, if not the entire $5,000. So I'd be looking at hopefully $1,500 again out of the regional fund and $1,750 out of my District 1 fund.
I don't know if I have $1,750 left, but I believe I should have.
You do. We did have an update from the CFO, Jason Martell, on the grant contributions, but I do know there were some grants that also didn't kind of happen. So at the end of the day, what I would commit to is, if you'd like to allocate the $1,750 to get to the $5,000 from your fund, if there are any shortfalls, we could cover that from the District 4 one. I think it should be fine, but as long as we have that understanding. So we could make the motion being to approve a $5,000 contribution for the Almadam New Horizons Seniors Club with $1,750 to be taken from Districts 1 and 2 and $1,500 to be taken from the regional fund, with the acknowledgement that if there's a shortfall in any one of those accounts, it could come from the District 4 funds.
I've worked closely, and Councillor Digdon can agree to this and attest to this. We've worked closely together, Councillor Digdon and I, for the betterment of everyone and every organization here on Almadam. It was fortunate for us, and we were lucky that we were very close to the end of our fiscal budget year, and we still had some great amounts in our district funds, which allowed us to do that. I think myself, I had $3,750 in mine, and Councillor Digdon very close to $3,700 as well, 36 and change. So I knew going in that we would be able to make this work for both the Almadam Senior Horizons Club and the Almadam Garden Club.
Well, again, we have to do everything we can as a council to, I guess, lessen the burden for all people when it comes to funding. So, if we can pitch a little bit of money to help with the cost of upkeep, repairs, infrastructure, then it's one thing we try to do for our own, not just our own, but for all of Richmond County. Because as you've seen throughout the year, we support, everybody supports everybody's district. You try to do as much as you can for your own, but if it's something that really affects everybody within the county, then you also come together and support the other.
The warden did mention also that she would help out with the regional fund and some district funds from her account. So, it's two very important organizations and great volunteers for our community, and we were just thankful and grateful that we could help them out.
In the past, anybody who's watched our council knows that, we support the warden's district. We support them right through District 3, District 4, District 5. So it's nice to see the warden step up. And again, that's why she is the warden for that reason, because she steps up all the time. So it's nice to see her step up and say that if there is a shortfall, then if she has money left in her district, she'll make sure it happens.
And there you have it. That wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, and a special thank you to my interview guests this week, Amanda Mombourquette, Sean Sampson, Michael Digdon, and Veronica Merryfield. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen over the past hour here on Telile 24/7, or you'd just like to make suggestions for a future edition of the show, feel free to contact me directly or contact Telile Community Television in Arichat. And be sure to follow Telile on social media. For now, I'm Adam Cooke. Thank you once again for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I look forward to seeing you again soon with a brand new show. Bye for now.